Last week we talked about how we live in the world where the bad guys win. This is just the way the world works. We're not going to be able to change it. The bad guys are going to win in this world. And then we saw that the traditional Christian belief is that one day the world will end. God will create a new world. And this will be a world where the good guys win. As the Bible puts it, it will be a world where righteousness dwells. Now that's one way Christianity looks at it, but there's a completely different way of looking at it that was popular in Christianity back when it first started. And I believe it's a reasonable alternative to what we talked about last week. It's just a different interpretation of things from Scripture. And I want us to consider that. But before we do that, we need to talk about something else. So we'll consider that next week. And this week we'll lay the groundwork for it. And next week we'll talk about another idea about how to deal with living in a world where it's the bad guys who win. So to start with, think about a question. What are you? Another way to look at it is, what makes you you? Is it your body? Are you wrapped up inside your body? Is your body you? Not long ago, Wanda and I took a selfie of ourselves, and neither one of us was satisfied with the way it turned out. We don't look like we did 40 years ago. And I told Wanda, I said, that's not me. I'm not going to accept that I look like that. You see, my body has aged. I don't look like I used to. And it's not just looks either. I can't do what I used to do. So my body is aging not only in appearance but also in ability. And if I keep living, that will continue. My body will continue to decline. But yet I'm still me. So me is not my body. What is it then? It's something independent of my body. I guess you'd say me is my consciousness, my awareness that I exist, my interaction with things. The New Testament talks about it as our spirit. And sometimes it's confusing depending on which Bible translation you use. Some will translate it as soul, others will translate it as spirit, but it's the same concept. It means you. Your consciousness, your uniqueness as an individual, your personality, your awareness that you're alive. It's what makes you you. It makes you conscious of your surroundings. Another way to put it is it's your self. It's your spirit. Now the spirit, of course, is separate from the body. It's not a part of the body. It's not like your heart or your bones or anything like that. It's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. It transcends the physical. And we've talked before about how Christianity is about the spiritual. Christianity is not about earthly things. Christianity is about spiritual things. The New Testament tells us our home is in heaven. That's where we belong. It tells us we're just passing through here. It tells us not to get caught up in the things of the world. It tells us not to strive for the things of the world. It tells us not to be like the world because this is not our home. We're just passing through on our way to somewhere else. Jesus told his followers that they are not of this world. We're in the world, but we're not of it because we're strangers here. We're strangers in a foreign land. There's an old hymn I am a stranger here within a foreign land. So that's because we are spiritual beings and we're not of this world. So when did we become us? When did we come into existence? Given that we have a spiritual part to us, when did that become there? Was it when we were born? That's what we've been told. But I want to look at another idea. First, I want us to think of things Jesus said in the Gospels. In John chapter 9, Jesus and the disciples are walking along, and they come across a man who was born blind. The disciples say, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither. And then Jesus healed this man. You know, this is a familiar passage, and yet there's something in there that's easy to just hop on by. The disciples asked Jesus if this man had sinned in order to make himself be born blind. Well, how in the world could he have sinned before he was born? There's no hint anywhere in the Bible that says that you sin in your mother's womb. That's not a concept. Every time in the Bible when we find sin talked about, we find it talked about in the context of adults. So notice that Jesus did not turn to the disciples and say, are you crazy? How could he have sinned before he was born? He didn't do that. Now in Matthew chapter 16, it talks about Jesus coming into the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Again, we may skip over that. John the Baptist was dead. He had been beheaded. Elijah and Jeremiah and the prophets were long gone. There's nothing in the Gospels that says that Jesus went around saying, I am John the Baptist, I am Elijah, I am Jeremiah. There's no hint that Jesus ever identified himself as one of those people. So why in the world do people think he was one of them? If you go to the apocryphal book of Wisdom of Solomon, which is considered a part of the Bible by all Christians except some Protestants, you will find this. As a child, I was by nature well endowed. A good soul fell to my lot, or rather being good, I entered an undefiled body. Being good, I entered an undefiled body. There's another book called the Book of the Second Enoch. It is recognized as scripture by some Christian groups, and it says this: all the souls of men, whatever of them are not yet born, and their places, were prepared for eternity. For all the souls are prepared for eternity before the composition of the earth. And so that reflects a belief there, that before the world was ever created, God created the soul of every person who would ever exist. The idea was that God created human souls to be united to Him, but they need to have a human body and a human life to be able to have real union with God and truly be with God. Only through a process of development in a human lifetime could they achieve union with God. And that was a belief found in some parts of ancient Judaism. If we leave ancient Judaism and move to ancient Christianity, we find an early Christian named Origen. He lived in the early 200s. He was an important figure in early Christianity. Many of his writings have survived. He believed that before God created the world, God created the number of spiritual beings that Origen called logika, and these were created close to God, and God intended them to remain close to Him, but they grew tired of that, and they tried to stake out on their own. They wandered farther and farther away from God, and they needed a way back to God. In order to bring them back, God created the universe, created the earth, and gave these logika a human body. And they are what we would call souls. So God gave these souls a human body so they could develop and begin the process of drawing back to Him. And according to Origen, the process of this drawing back to God is not totally completed as a human being. If the soul doesn't develop enough in its earthly life to have union with God, it may be sent back again. Eventually, though, all souls are reunited to God. The important thing about this is that in early Christian thought, we see the idea that a person's existence does not begin with their human physical birth, but that they were pre-existing as spiritual beings before they entered the physical world. And this is what's called the pre-existence of souls. And so Origen believed that each one of us was originally created as a spiritual being and had an existence as a spiritual being. Another early Christian writing survived from a man named Gregory of Nyssa. He lived about 350 years after the time of Jesus, and he is considered a saint within Christianity, in the forms of Christianity who venerate saints. And he wrote this: Christians today are all confused about the pre-existence. Some say we lived in families and in tribes there just as we do here, and that we lost our wings when we came down here, but we'll get them back again. Here again is an ancient Christian document. It contains the idea that we had a spiritual existence before we had a human earthly existence. And from only a few years after Gregory of Nyssa, a guy named Synesius was an early Christian leader. This prayer from him has survived. Father, grant that my soul may merge into the light and be no more thrust back into the illusion of earth. The illusion of earth. Synesius wrote, it is possible by labor and time and a transition into other lives for the imaginative soul to emerge from this dark abode. So you see, there is indication from a number of surviving early Christian writings that there was, at least in some forms of Christianity, a belief that each person existed as a spiritual being long before they were born on earth. You could look at it as our time here being a time of development, a learning and a growing process, or you could look at it as that something has placed a barrier between us and God, and this time here is drawing back to God. These are different ways of looking at it, and we don't know exactly how all the ancient Christians looked at it, or if they all looked at it the same way, we don't know. The important thing, though, is generalized, we can say that there was a fairly popular belief in some forms of ancient Christianity that each of us had an existence in the spiritual realm before we existed on earth. Of course, we don't remember it. But oddly enough, there have been studies done on children that indicate that at least some children seem to have memories of a past existence. These studies, in my opinion, are inconclusive at this point, but there is that possibility. So if it is true that we had a spiritual existence before we became alive on earth, it would mean that what we really are, when I say, what are you? What we really are, we are spiritual beings. That's what we really are. And that our existence is not tied to our bodies. We are spiritual beings temporarily inside a human body. Our lives, the life of me, does not depend upon the life of my earthly bodies. I am independent of my earthly body. I just don't realize it. As one author put it, our bodies on earth are like clothing that we wear. In John chapter 11, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. That verse has caused consternation among people. What in the world does it mean? It's almost nonsensical, but it becomes nonsensical no more when you factor in the idea that we exist as spiritual beings independent of physical bodies, and that we existed before we became a human being. When your body dies, you don't die. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. You don't die. Your body, which is not you, dies. For our gospel reading today, we heard Jesus say not to worry about our life, what we eat, what we drink, or what we put on. And that's another thing from Jesus that's caused so much consternation among Christians. How can you tell somebody, don't worry about what you're going to eat and drink, when you have to have eat and drink to survive? When you have to have clothing to survive? But if you couple it with the idea that what we are as spiritual beings independent of our bodies, then it makes sense. Jesus said it's not life more than food and the body more than clothing. That doesn't make sense if all we are is physical beings. But if our life, our very existence, does not depend upon our physical bodies, then it does make sense. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus said, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. There again, that doesn't make sense if you believe that you are nothing but a physical body. But if you put into the equation the idea that we are spiritual beings, independent of our physical bodies, then it makes sense. And we can move on into more of the New Testament and see how it makes sense when Paul says we are sojourners here on our way to our true home. It makes sense when Paul says our citizenship is in heaven. It makes sense when we are told not to love the things of the world and not to love the world. We shouldn't love the world or the things of the world because we're not from here and we're not dependent on here. We are from somewhere else. You see, in so many things in the New Testament, it just depends on how you interpret it. And frankly, if all we are is earthly beings dependent upon our bodies, a lot of stuff in the New Testament does not make sense, and we have to do what so many people have done. Either ignore them and skip over them, or come up with a bunch of nonsensical, convoluted meandering to try to explain them away. But what if it is true that this is a time of development, of growth, of returning to God? What if it is true that what we truly are is spiritual beings? What if it's true that our true home is in heaven? And that we are only here on a journey back. If you go into an Orthodox church, you will see that they are all built according to a certain pattern. And there in the middle, where you are, you look up and there's a dome with windows all around it. And there's a big picture of Jesus up there. It's the icon of Jesus Pantocrator. Jesus the victor. All around there are icons to various saints and biblical figures. The reason they're like that is that when you walk into that Orthodox church, they want you to be transported to heaven because that's where you truly belong. So you get the sense of being transported to heaven. You look up there. That's where you belong. It's not totally wrong to say that's where you came from and that's where you're returning to. That could very well be the way it is.